My name is Kurt Solmssen. I'm a painter. I went to the Academy of Fine Arts in Philadelphia.
Because the world is not always light, calm, and beautiful, Henri Matisse painted Luxe, Calme et Volupté. The title came from a Charles Baudelaire poem about an imaginary place. Its refrain was, there's only order and beauty, abundant, calm, and voluptuous. From the time we met at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts in the late 1970s, my dear friend Kurt Solmssen has transformed the places of his life into images of light, calm, and peace. Gazing upon his paintings, your heart may skip a beat as when you see a person of particular beauty, but your mind will find rest. In June of 2020, the Linda Hodges Gallery of Seattle published a book on Kurt's art. It's divided into sections based on subject matter. As we looked at the first section, we reminisced about the old days.
The early years, paintings I did in the 1980s in Philadelphia, the Jack Frost Sugar Company, North Philadelphia, where we lived.
Along with fellow artists Patrick Connors, Stanley Beelan, and Douglas Martinson, Kurt and I lived in a group house at 1216 Mount Vernon Street. Post-industrial Philadelphia was crumbling all around us. Kurt found a tragic beauty in it, and Nancy and I treasure a painting he gave us back then.
This is from the early 1980s along Delaware Avenue, Shackamaxon Shoe Factory, which is probably no longer there. It's probably torn down. I just painted this over something else fairly quickly. It had sort of a melancholy feeling to it. So I was painting this, and a police car drove up behind me, and the officer got out and he said, "Oh, did you ever see that show on TV, How Fast a Guy Can Paint?" I said, "Yep, I've seen it." Or, "Yes, sir, I've seen it."
We all ended up marrying our girlfriends and moving out of our group house. Kurt married artist Rebecca Schofield. Becky had grown up in Conshohocken, a few miles upstream from Philadelphia. Here are just a few of the many paintings Kurt made near the Schuylkill River. The young couple began to travel.
Becky and I spent a couple months in Florida. Spain, when we lived in Ron Bateman's place on the Costa Blanca for about 6 months.
Though he paints wherever he travels, most of Kurt's work depicts the Pacific Northwest.
I've known Washington State my whole life. As a child, I visited in the summertime, and then in 1988, Becky and I moved here full-time.
In 2010, Nancy and I visited Kurt and Becky at their Vaughan, Washington home.
We live on the Puget Sound, south of Seattle. It's a series of bays and inlets connected to the Pacific Ocean. Vaughan Bay is on the Key Peninsula. It looks like a key. Vaughan Bay has very strong tides, and there's a sand spit, which is in a lot of the paintings. And there's a small channel, and the water comes in and out of that twice a day. So the bay almost empties out on a very low tide. So there's an island in the middle of the bay that you can walk out on, and then the tide rushes back in. There are a lot of Douglas fir trees. At one time, the woods came right up to the beach. Some beautiful deciduous trees. There used to be commercial orchards on the Key Peninsula, and it's generally temperate climate. It's not really a cruel winter like North Dakota or Michigan. We get a lot of mist and light rain. So there's a reputation that it's raining all the time, but beautiful sunny summers. People, when they look at the paintings, think it looks quite a bit like Maine, but the beaches are not sandy, little stones. Big glaciers came down and made these bays and peninsulas. Everything used to be taken around by small ship. They called it the mosquito fleet, and they would deliver everything from groceries to lumber. And they had timber mills at the end of a lot of these bays. And the house we live in was built with wood that was milled right there.
A repeated motif in much of Kurt's work has been an iconic yellow boat.
My grandfather bought the boat in 1935 in Tacoma from a place that built one of these a day. It's a work boat, a flat-bottom skiff, beautiful lines. It's made of cedar and oak stripping. This is a copy that we made of the original boat. A friend of ours put these together. He was a woodworker, but he just used regular old plywood. And you see what happened after 10 years. It fell apart. So the materials are really important in a painting or a sculpture or a boat. He bought it and he rowed it to his house on Maury Island, which was several miles away. At some point, the boat was lost in the fog, so when they found it, they decided to paint it bright yellow so you could see it really well. And that boat's been in our family since the 1930s.
I asked him when he started painting it.
First one in early 80s. The summer after the first year at the Pennsylvania Academy, I came out west. The Northwest landscape has a lot of blue and green. And so this yellow boat looked really good in the landscape. And then the lines of the boat are so beautiful. And also a boat was symbolic for me.
Though the boat is from his mother's side of the family, it's on his father's side where the boat symbolism is most poignant.
My father's family coming across the Atlantic Ocean, they were in a much bigger boat, but my grandparents were German. They lived in Berlin, and in the 1920s, my grandfather had a job in New York City. While he was there, my father was born, so he was a U.S. citizen. And then they went back to Germany. When Hitler came to power, they had to leave, and so they left around 1936. Came in a large ship to New York first, and then to Philadelphia. Becky found the ship registry with all the passengers on it, and that was interesting how they were labeled. It says a lot about the time. An abandoned house, supposedly built by a ship's captain, and it's right on the water, so it floods when the tide comes in. I rowed the boat down there and anchored it so you could see it from the upstairs window.
How did Kurt develop his style and subject matter? In his younger days, he was influenced by art we could see every day at the Pennsylvania Academy Museum. In nearby Bucks County, the Michener Museum featured work by the Pennsylvania Impressionists, another inspiration for Kurt. The landscapes of George Inness had an early impact on Kurt.
I really liked how they were very abstract, atmospheric, but solid. Some of them you couldn't tell how they were painted with a brush or a mop.
But it was an artist from New York whose work helped Kurt define his subject matter.
In 1999, I saw a big show of Fairfield Porter's work in New York. The way that Porter painted the people in his life and his surroundings, the freshness of the color, I thought was really beautiful and great. Peter Tatichev, the art dealer, once told my sister-in-law Sarah that I was the West Coast reincarnation of Porter. He also said to me, but you have to be something else, you have to be more than that.
In addition to his East Coast influences, he's absorbed lessons from the Bay Area Figurative School as well as the Asian inflection of Pacific Northwest art.
What I do, I think, is a combination of East Coast painterly realism combined with these other West Coast influences.
And with a particular end in mind. As Fairfield Porter once said, when I paint, I think that what would satisfy me is to express what Bonnard said Renoir told him, make everything more beautiful. That's easier said than done when the places and people you paint are already beautiful. Kurt and Becky's lovely daughters have appeared often in Kurt's work.
Marcia and Lauren have done many, many drawings of the girls as they were growing up. A number 2 pencil on paper. Just sitting around the house. Sometimes as studies for paintings.
Some of Kurt's most beautiful paintings are of his daughters as they grew up.
An early picture of Lauren and Marcia I painted from the kitchen looking out. Becky was doing a painting of these flowers in Florida. She bought a little tiny flower. This thing just grew bigger and bigger, encircles Lauren's head. Marcia sitting on the porch in the sun, reading Harry Potter with a cat. We've had quite a few cats over the years, and this cat, I think, was eaten by a coyote at some point. Sitting in the sun on the other side of the house when she's a little bit older, doing some painting of her own. There's a tree fort in a madrona tree at the channel of the bay, which is right down the beach. A particular kind of tree that grows in the Northwest, which has thin red paper-like bark that peels off. Marcia was playing guitar in those days, and I asked her to come down there and pose. Late in the day, did the painting from drawings and from life. 2 paintings sitting in this brown leather chair. Both had one of our cats sitting up there. He knew when it was time to pose, he'd just get in position and pose. Very smart cat. One's in the springtime with forsythia, and the other one was in November. Sitting on a wood bin at the back of the house with a fig tree behind her. One night I was walking down the beach and I saw our daughter and some friends, and they were all having this bonfire. fire. I took some photographs. Later, I built little fires in the evening and painted the landscape with the boat and to get all those colors. And you start to see things in black and white at that point, tonally, where it's so dark you can't even tell what color you're using from the palette, but when you bring it back inside, it's very brilliant color scheme. What you see in these bonfire paintings, the wheel of an 18-wheel truck that a friend welded together, and he traded with me for a lithograph. So right as the sun has just gone down, there's 3 types of light in the painting. The light of the fire, the light of the house, the porch light, and then the light of the sunset. So the challenge was to figure out which one's going to be the dominant light in the painting. The fire is really the brightest bright.
You see a different kind of beauty in Kurt's winter paintings.
In the wintertime, we often have dense fog over the bay. The sun, as it rises, eventually burns off the fog. In trying to capture the very abstract and minimalist beauty of the Northwest winter, the kind of pearl light of the region, I thought about various artists, Morris Graves, Whistler, Rothko, and also the strong influence of Asian art in the Pacific Northwest.
I remember you used to go out and paint even in the worst weather.
When I came to the Academy, there were a lot of really talented people there. One thing I thought I could do maybe better than other people would be able to stand out in any type of weather and paint. I had been an athlete in high school, and I thought I could be tougher that way or something. Also, I enjoyed it. I didn't really like being in the studio with 30 other people with their easels all crowded around. I wanted to be making art, and I thought I could do it somehow outdoors in the landscape.
Was that partially because of your experience with Lou Sloan?
Oh, Lou Sloan certainly taught us a lot about how to paint. Lou Sloan was very giving. We took trips up to the Catskills. He would demonstrate painting, and then people would go off and do their own. I went on a few of those trips. It was a lot of fun. What are your memories of Lou Sloan?
I thought Lou Sloan was perhaps the most generous teacher we had. He was always encouraging, very kind. He seemed to really care about the students a lot.
Yeah.
California artists like Richard Diebenkorn and David Park did not worry about realism versus abstraction. To them, everything was composition and color.
People tell me recently that my work looks more abstract.
I certainly thought so when I saw these recent paintings Kurt did in New Mexico.
I think that I've always broken down the images into big abstract forms.
Kurt's paintings have a quality of inevitability. Everything is just right. He told me he was struck by another Fairfield Porter quote, "The shapes in a painting should fit together like puzzle pieces." I asked him how he composes his pictures.
I look around until I see something that looks like a painting image to me. I tend to try to break it down into very big shapes, verticals, horizontals, and then sometimes a very strong diagonal. I don't feel like I'm exaggerating the color. I've always admired painters where the color was clear and bright and beautiful. Van Eyck, Vermeer, on up to painters today, but the color is clean. And then how do you make a representational image using simplified areas of color? That's the challenge. The paintings are very structured. I don't know what it is about my personality, but I like the image to be not out of balance. Maybe because life isn't really organized and balanced. In these pictures, I try to make it that way. I'm interested in architectural shapes, and then the figures sit in the space. Sometimes I see someone sitting in a space and then I paint that having seen it, but in other times I work on the whole image as a space and then place the figure in there. Oftentimes there's a figure in it and then I take the figure out, move the figure somewhere else, but the whole space itself has to feel balanced in some way. I often paint details into a painting and then remove them because they're unnecessary or distracting. I don't do portraits up close. I don't think I really know how to do it very well. I draw the figure and you can tell who the person is by their posture, how they're sitting there. The shapes of the figure are simplified, so they're just another group of shapes within all the shapes in the painting, and I want them all to relate to each other. So there's only enough detail to explain what it is, enough in relation to the whole painting. I want you to get an emotional impact from the whole thing as color and paint without a lot of detail.
With your Germanic roots, that brings to mind the wonderful word Gestalt.
You tell me what that means, because I only...
It's what you just said.
Oh. And I think we were brought up in that sensibility where you let the viewer do some of the filling in.
How do you know when to leave something alone?
That is a good question. Sometimes when you see a painting of mine, some of the areas that are left, you might call unfinished, are somehow necessary. The parts that I struggled with and tried to get just right, they're not that interesting sometimes. I try to get the painting right the first time. For technical reasons, you don't want to just pile up layers and layers of paint in terms of the painting not cracking. Let's just say I try to get it right the first time, and if not, I keep working on it and paint over it. Sometimes I finish paintings, varnish them, photograph them, and then someone, usually Becky, my wife, will say, "That doesn't look finished." And then I take the varnish off and work on it for another week or two or a month or two.
Is Becky your greatest critic?
Yes. For years I needed her to always look at the painting, and I also used to ask you at Mount Vernon Street, I'd say, "John, can you look at this painting, remember?" And you'd say, "Oh, this is great painting." And then you'd say, "There's just one thing."
I was the wrong person to ask.
No, you gave me good advice. You remember the time when I used a whole can of lead white paint to do a landscape? It was all gray. And you said, "Oh, Kurt, this is so interesting. Doug, come look at this painting. He's onto something here." And Doug said, "Well, he might be onto something, but this isn't it."
So, who did you listen to?
I think I listened to Doug in that case. It's interesting that related to these Northwest paintings I did eventually, very minimalist gray, but that wasn't quite there. That was still very heavy-handed.
I was ahead of your time. Kurt, it was such a pleasure living in that house with you and those other guys, Adam, Stan, and Doug.
We all contributed to each other's maturing as artists.
Yeah, it was wonderful. When we visited Kurt and Becky, I remember seeing some very beautiful but rough photographs and photo collages.
I'm fascinated by the history of photography in painting and how various artists have used lenses to create their paintings through time. I had seen James Rosenquist's small collages that he put together from magazine ads to use for paintings. These days, a lot of artists use Photoshop in a similar way. I found photography a useful but very problematical tool. A photograph gives a certain kind of information. It's not the way our eyes see. I have to be careful not to go down that rabbit hole of trying to render what I see in the photograph, because that's not what I'm using them for. I only use photographs that I have taken myself, or occasionally I'll use a photograph that Becky's taken of me where I'm in the picture. I've always been interested in directional light rather than the steady north light that many artists prefer. One difficulty with painting directional light is that the light is constantly moving from minute to minute, from week to week as the seasons change. I refer to photographs to see how light at a certain time of day or a certain day of the year is coming into a room. If a large painting is in progress for weeks and months, the whole nature of the light changes. And so I have to come to some decision about what moment it is that the painting is going to be about.
Kurt's primary use of photography is for composition. Notice the changes that led up to this final design. And though he likely disagrees with me, I believe his beautiful paint-spattered work photos and collages are themselves works of art. I asked Kurt how my favorite painting by him came to be.
One day I was looking down from the porch of my mother's house and I saw the yellow boat floating, and my brother was sitting on the concrete steps. September afternoon light was sparkling off the water, and I was very excited by that image.
Kurt grabbed a camera and took a few shots, and then
I went back to the studio, took a 50 by 70 painting that I had been working on, a landscape, which had a big blue sky, yellow grass in the foreground. It was very static. I didn't really like that painting, so I took some yellow paint and made a brush stroke in the sky for the yellow boat, placed that in there, and then ochre color for the light on RG's back, and those two shapes started it and worked from there, and then very quickly painted in the rest of the painting. You can see the colors from this landscape painting showing through, thinly painted over the other painting, so it makes these variations which are unexpected. It wouldn't have looked like that if I had painted on a raw canvas. Towards the end of the painting, I put these strokes of white paint which show the ripples of water progressing towards the bulkhead. Then this coiled garden hose I added at the very end to make a shape. You could look at this as that the figure is coiled in anticipation, it seems like, and the hose is coiled, and then looking out with the boat, that's the release of the painting, the blue expanse. There was a French blog. Someone had written a poem. It was funny for all of us because it talked about the carefree man, doesn't have a worry in the world, and it's just not really his personality at all. But
Kurt has painted different versions of this image. But Yellow Boat in a Blue Bay from 1999 remains my favorite. It is an iconic image. No wonder it graces the cover of his book. What is your feeling about the art world and your place in it?
well, one thing about my life that's unusual is that I do sculpture conservation. I mean, it's unusual for a painter. I've been doing sculpture conservation for about 40 years, and I get to see levels and parts of the art world that I wouldn't have seen just living on the rural Puget Sound. I go to different cities and I go to galleries and museums and I see the art world, what's going on. That's a great thing. And these days there's so many different styles going on at the same time. And so I follow what's going on in the art world with interest. I found a kind of work that I related to, which I thought I could do where I was living. I'm working with materials that I know well and I'm comfortable with, and they're very simple. Colored pigments on canvas, number 2 pencil, some lithography. I found enough of a challenge in the artwork that I do, painting what's around me.
Are you, by and large, happy with how your art career has played out?
Yes, I feel very fortunate to have had a place to work and a studio to work in. About 40 years, I'd say the great thing about being an artist is that when you pick up the paintbrush for the day, it's the same feeling I had when I was 25 years old. And every day it's like, I don't know what I'm going to paint. But when I get an idea, then I can just live in that painting for weeks or months. It's challenging and frustrating and difficult, but so much fun.
Looking at Kurt's paintings is also fun. But it's so much more than that. For me, their beauty is somehow consoling. I have known Kurt for over 40 years. One might think he has led a charmed life, a beautiful family and home, and successful career. But he has known heartache and struggle. Still waters do run deep. There's a touch of melancholy and the elegiac in his work. I love that. I think it's what makes them so beautiful.
It's a jar with medium, and stuck on the outside is grass and dried medium and paper towel and pebbles, but it's all kind of a coating, see? It's got this edge on it. It's my medium jar.